Welcome to this deep dive, and wow, we're tackling The Catcher in the Rye today. Looks like you sent us the whole thing, so
Yeah, someone's ready for a deep dive.
definitely ready for a deep dive into this classic, huh? It's one of those that really just keeps sparking debate, even decades later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and for a lot of people, it all starts with that voice, right? Holden Caulfield.
Yeah.
So distinct and just so unforgettable.
I mean, he's cynical and vulnerable, and he's funny,
Yeah.
but heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, this teenager, clearly intelligent,
Yeah.
but deeply troubled. Where do you even begin with Holden as a character?
Oh, he's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, he really is. He's such a mix of contradictions, right? Like on the surface, he's rebellious.
Yeah.
He's this wisecracking teenager rejecting everything and everyone that he thinks is phony.
Right.
But beneath that cynicism, there's this deep sense of grief and loss that he's just carrying around with him.
Oh, absolutely. And the death of his younger brother, Ali, it permeates everything, right? It's like you could just sense how this loss has just colored his entire worldview.
Completely. And that's where that stream of consciousness style that Salinger uses is so effective. It's like we're right there in Holden's head with him experiencing all of his pain, his confusion, and his longing for something real in a world that just feels more and more fake.
Can you elaborate on that stream of consciousness a bit? What exactly is it, and how does it work in The Catcher in the Rye?
Well, think of it like this. Instead of like a neatly packaged narrative, you get Holden's thoughts and feelings just poured out onto the page, raw and unfiltered. It's almost like we're overhearing this inner monologue, complete with all the tangents and the slang and just that emotional intensity of a teenager trying to make sense of the world,
Yeah, and that makes him so relatable, even if his actions can be frustrating at times.
Totally.
I mean, take that word he uses constantly, phony.
Oh, yeah.
It's practically his catchphrase.
Oh.
How do you interpret that? Like his obsession with phoniness.
Well, I think it's more than just teenage rebellion, although there's definitely an element of that in there.
Right.
But remember, Holden has experienced this profound loss, right? With Ali's death, it's like he's searching for authenticity, for something genuine in a world that suddenly feels really shallow and meaningless to him.
Thinking about Ali's death and Holden's alienation, it's almost like he's stuck between childhood and adulthood, unable to fully embrace either one.
You're exactly right. And this theme of innocence and that loss of it, it's so central to the novel.
Yeah.
It's tied to Holden's famous fantasy of being the catcher in the rye.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that. He pictures himself saving children from falling off this cliff into the corrupt adult world.
Such a poignant image. And you really feel that tension throughout the book, Holden's yearning to protect innocence while at the same time battling his own demons and trying to figure out how to grow up.
Yeah, and it's not just Ali's death either. There are these hints that Holden has experienced other traumas or disappointments that he never fully articulates. It's like he's built up these defenses, this cynical persona to shield himself from any more pain.
That's really interesting. So his alienation isn't just about his grief over Ali, but maybe it's also a way of protecting himself from further hurt in a world he already sees as hostile and phony.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why The Catcher in the Rye continues to resonate with so many readers, especially young adults.
Yeah.
Holden really embodies that universal feeling of being lost, of trying to figure out who you are and where you belong in a world that doesn't always make sense.
There's such a universality to that struggle, and Salinger captures it so vividly through Holden's voice and his experiences. What stands out to you about Holden's journey through New York City? He's constantly on the move, almost like he's trying to outrun his own inner turmoil.
That's a great observation. His physical journey does really mirror his emotional state. He's restless. He's searching for something that he can't quite define, but each encounter, each experience seems to just leave him feeling emptier and more disillusioned.
And the people that he meets along the way, I mean, they're just such a fascinating mix of characters. You have Phoebe, his younger sister, who kind of represents this pure, unadulterated innocence that Holden just desperately wants to protect.
Right.
And then there's Jane Gallagher, this girl he so clearly idealizes, who represents a simpler, more genuine time in his life.
It's interesting how both Phoebe and Jane are somewhat removed from the main narrative, though.
Yeah.
They're more like figures in Holden's memory, almost like ghosts of a past that he can't quite let go of.
Yeah, they're almost like symbols of what he's lost, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And then you have characters like Stradlater and Ackley, Holden's classmates at Pensy Prep.
Right.
who represent different aspects of that phony adult world that he's so repelled by.
Yeah, Stradlater, the handsome popular jock, embodies that superficiality and hypocrisy that Holden sees in a lot of adults.
Yeah.
While Ackley, with his awkwardness and social anxieties, represents another kind of alienation, one that Holden maybe recognizes in himself.
It's like Holden sees parts of himself in both of them, which adds another layer to his disdain. And those scenes at Pensy Prep, with the dorm room antics and the awkward interactions, they capture that claustrophobia and the social pressures of boarding school life so perfectly.
Yes.
You really feel Holden's desperation to escape that environment.
And it's not just Pensy. Everywhere Holden goes, the bars, the nightclubs, the hotel rooms,
Yeah.
he encounters this phoniness and disappointment. He's constantly searching for a genuine connection, but he seems to just sabotage himself at every turn. Like he's pushing people away, even as he's craving their company,
Yeah.
you know? Like take the date with Sally Hayes.
Oh, Sally Hayes. She's such a fascinating character, too. She seems to represent everything that Holden claims to despise. Like she's preoccupied with appearances and social status and all the things he finds phony.
Right, and yet he still asks her out on a date.
Yeah.
He even proposes that they run away together, which is such an impulsive
He is.
and frankly bizarre suggestion.
Yeah, what do you make of that moment? It just seems so out of character even for Holden.
I think it speaks to his desperation. You know, he's so lonely and so disillusioned with the world around him that he's grasping at any possibility of escape,
Yeah.
even if it's with someone he doesn't really respect.
And then there's that really poignant encounter with Mr. Antolini, Holden's former teacher.
Yeah.
He seems to be one of the few adults that Holden actually respects or at least sees as somewhat genuine.
And Mr. Antolini offers some of the most profound advice in the whole novel.
Yeah.
He warns Holden about the dangers of falling, you know, of losing himself in despair. He encourages him to find his place in the world, to hold on to the things that matter.
But Holden, in his state of emotional turmoil, he totally misinterprets Mr. Antolini's actions.
Yeah.
And it further fuels his paranoia and alienation.
Yeah.
It's another example of how Holden's own insecurities and fears prevent him from forming meaningful connections.
Absolutely. He's so quick to assume the worst of people, you know, to see their actions through this really cynical lens. It's a defense mechanism, but it also creates this self-fulfilling prophecy, leading him to isolate himself even more.
His relationship with women is particularly complex. He's clearly attracted to them, but he also seems to fear and mistrust them at the same time. It's as if he sees them as both temptresses and threats to his idealized vision of innocence.
That's a great point. You can really see this in his interactions with Sunny, the prostitute that he hires.
Yeah.
It's not really about sex for Holden. It's more about his longing for connection, his inability to deal with the complexities of adult relationships.
And his idealized view of Jane Gallagher really emphasizes this.
Yeah.
You know, he puts her on a pedestal, remembering their childhood games and those shared moments of innocence. But he also hesitates to reach out to her, almost afraid to tarnish that idealized image.
It's like he's more comfortable with the memory of Jane than with the possibility of a real relationship with her. He's afraid of disappointment, afraid of seeing that even Jane might not live up to this perfect image he has in his head.
You know, it's interesting that we haven't talked much about Salinger's writing style beyond that stream of consciousness aspect.
Yeah.
There's more to it than just that isn't there. There's a certain rhythm to his prose, a way of capturing the cadence of teenage speech that feels so authentic.
Absolutely. Salinger's use of slang and colloquialisms and Holden's unique voice, it all contributes to this incredibly immersive reading experience. You really feel like you're right there with Holden, hearing his thoughts, experiencing his emotions.
It's so raw and so immediate. And he doesn't shy away from those darker aspects of adolescence.
Right.
You know, the angst, the confusion,
Yeah.
the disillusionment.
And that's exactly why the book was so controversial when it was first published. People weren't used to seeing teenagers portrayed with such honesty and complexity.
Yeah.
Some people found Holden's language offensive and his behavior disturbing.
But for so many young people, especially in the decades following its publication, Holden became this relatable, almost iconic figure, a symbol of teenage rebellion, a voice for those who felt misunderstood or alienated.
And I think that's part of the reason why The Catcher in the Rye has endured, you know? It speaks to that universal experience of adolescence, that sense of searching for identity, of trying to find your place in a world that can feel overwhelming and phony.
But it's more than just a teenage angst novel.
Right.
There's a depth to Salinger's writing, a nuanced exploration of themes like loss, grief, and that search for meaning that resonates with readers of all ages.
Exactly. It's a book that you can revisit at different stages in your life and find these new layers of meaning.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the mark of a truly great novel.
As we've been talking about Holden and his journey, I can't help but keep thinking about the title of the book, The Catcher in the Rye.
Ah, it's such a powerful image.
Yeah, so central to Holden's character. Can we talk more about that? What is it about that image that's so compelling?
Well, it's the heart of the novel, isn't it? That moment where Holden explains his dream of standing in a field of rye-catching children before they fall off this cliff. It reveals his deep desire to protect innocence, to shield other people from the pain and disillusionment that he's experienced himself.
And you can't help but wonder if that desire to be the catcher stems from his inability to save Allie.
Yeah.
It's like he's trying to redeem himself to prevent others from suffering the same loss that he did.
I think that's a really insightful connection. You're right. Holden's grief and guilt over Allie's death really fueled this fantasy of being a savior, of rescuing others from that inevitable fall into adulthood.
But it's an impossible fantasy, as you said earlier.
It is.
He can't protect everyone, and ultimately he can't even protect himself.
Right, and that leads to that breakdown at the end of the novel. That's where Salinger's brilliance really shines, I think. He doesn't offer any easy answers or a neat resolution.
Right.
We're left with this ambiguous ending, Holden recounting his experiences from some sort of institution, and it's unclear whether he's truly learned anything or whether he'll be able to heal and move forward.
It's that ambiguity that makes The Catcher in the Rye such a powerful and lasting work.
Right.
It just leaves us with questions.
Right.
It prompts us to consider what happens to Holden after the novel ends.
Yeah.
Does he find his way back from the brink? Does he reconnect with Phoebe or with Jane? Does he find a place where he truly belongs?
Exactly. And I think that's why the book continues to resonate with readers decades later.
Yeah.
It doesn't offer those easy answers, but it invites us to grapple with these complex questions about identity and loss and the challenges of growing up. It challenges us to confront our own experiences and our anxieties about the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with this thought. If Holden were a teenager today, how do you think he would navigate the world?
Oh.
What would he find phony in modern society? What would his journey look like in this age of social media and instant communication?
That is a fascinating question. I think it's one that every reader has to ponder for themselves. The beauty of The Catcher in the Rye is that it continues to evolve with each generation, prompting new interpretations and discussions.
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring the intricacies of The Catcher in the Rye with you.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. It's always a joy to delve into such a rich and timeless novel.